Well, welcome to the third talk on world history, which is going to deal with the subject of geography and topography. And topography is basically a posh name for saying landscapes. And I'm going to argue that the landscapes we see around us in the world today are exactly what we would expect to see from a worldwide flood, and are really not reconcilable with a long age. Now, to understand that, you have to really understand the nature of what a worldwide flood would look like when it comes to the recession of the waters. So obviously one can easily understand the covering of the earth, but once the earth is covered in water, there is a need for the water then to go back into the oceans. So if one assumes that the oceans were lowered by a kilometer or two, the water would then be rushing back into the oceans, and you would have two, as it were, flows of water. The first flow would be what we might call the sheet flow of water, which is the huge amounts of waters going into the oceans very quickly in one go. Then you'll get to a point where the waters will become less volume of water on the earth, and therefore the water will no longer be going in sheet form, but in a channelizing form, where the water will be cutting deep channels. So the first effect of the water, the sheet water, would be to create large-scale, often flat surfaces, whereas the second form of flow would give you more intricate, detailed channels. And if we understand those two principles, then we'll understand how the landscape will look. So the first particular surface I want to look at is planation surfaces. Now, planation surfaces are surfaces that you can see look very flat. So here we have a planation surface at the top of a mountain. It's quite inconceivable how that could have happened over long periods of time. And this is a more normal planation surface in, might call things like the large areas of America, in the Midwest, and also in the Siberian steppe. But we see these all around the world, these very flat surfaces. What's interesting is that these flat surfaces are not made up of the same type of rock. The underlying rock is sometimes hard sedimentary layers or soft sedimentary layers. Now, in a situation like that, if we were looking at millions of years, we would have expected those surfaces to have eroded, with hard layers obviously eroding less quickly than soft layers, a bit like what we see in coastal areas, where we see soft layers being the bays and hard layers being the headlands. And we'd expect in the dips and the soft layers to be seeing some of the debris, as it were, from other erosions. But we don't see that. What we actually see is something very close to this figure, figure 5, where there is no difference between the hard and soft layers in terms of erosion. And on top of these layers, there's often rounded boulders that actually belong to another rock layer that's often many kilometers away, often 1,000 kilometers away. That is what we'd expect to find if that had been planed off by, as it says, the sheet water going into the oceans at the end of the worldwide flood. Another feature that we might see, and this is more towards the second stage, the channelizing stage, is water gaps. This is where rivers punch their way through mountain systems. Often, in this case, when one would have expected the river to have gone out through the more obvious place, it actually ends up going out through a mountain. And this is because as the waters recede in this channelizing phase, they see a weakness in the rock strata. It will start to pull away at that weakness, creating this deep channel, and eventually leaving us with that. So let's go back. With that sort of effect. So the more obvious place is not where the river's gone to, it's gone to somewhere which looks like right in the middle of the mountain. And we see this often in places like Nepal and other places where you have very steep rivers suddenly going straight through mountain systems. I see it, for instance, in the Severn River, punching its way through the Iron Bridge Gorge, or we see it in the River Rhine as it goes through that part of the world where the castles are, between Koblenz and Rudesheim. So rivers punching their way through mountain systems makes sense if the river hasn't created the valley, but has merely followed the valley, and the valley was created by a catastrophic event. And in this case, it's the worldwide flood. Another feature that's interesting are these great towers. Now, Ayers Rock is one a classic example in Australia, Uluru in Aborigine. But this is one which I'm familiar from, having watched Close Encounters of a Third Kind with Steven Spielberg's film, Devil's Tower in northeast Wyoming. Now, this is interesting because in this situation, I've got another one here, Steamboat Rock in the Upper Grand Coulee, Washington, and there are many such features. We can think of the incredible desert features where you've got these huge towers of rock. What's surprising about these is that they have very little erosional material at the base. And one would expect erosion from something like this because these are the most unstable types of features. These are features, rock faces, which will either onion skin erosion or freeze thaw erosion will break up because the rock is exposed to the elements. So what we might expect in an old age situation is that, even if it was conceivable for this to happen, that this exposed rock would literally erode to nothing over quite a short space of time, maybe 1 million years or so. But we don't see that. We see those rock faces with very little erosional material at the base. So that makes sense if, in fact, what was happening was that some volcanic eruption took place, and then the sheet water, after the eruption took place, sweeps away the unconsolidated sedimentary layers and leaves exposed, as it were, this remaining harder basalt rock or whatever formation it is. And if it's only been around for a few thousand years, that's all the level of erosion I would expect. And here's my little challenge. I suggest if we go to any rock face in the world, we will only find thousands of years of erosional material at the base of the rock face. Now, there's something. I could be falsified on that. People always say there's nothing that we produce that could be falsified. I think that's what I will find, because I believe all rock faces around the world are at maximum about 5,000 years old. Other features that would be created, and this is one closer to my heart because I was brought up in Bognor Regis. This is the South Downs. Classically, it looks like there must have been originally chalk going from one side to the other, the North to South Downs, and other features. Well, in the scenario I just described, it makes sense that as the water was basically going across these features, returning to the oceans, it would sweep away the top layers, creating this sort of incomplete dome. Makes sense, really, in terms of a catastrophic event. I'm not really sure that a long age would provide that level of erosion in the way that we see. Furthermore, we can see that here, this makes a lot more sense to something that's called the Grand Staircase. It goes from Utah right down to the Grand Canyon, Arizona. You can see the way that the ocean, the sheet flow of water would have swept away these rock layers. And then these canyons were the latter part of the erosional process, these narrow, deep channels. And just to confirm the point I was saying, if you go to any rock face like the Vermilion Cliffs, you'll find at the base of the Vermilion Cliffs no evidence of long millions of years of erosion. There's very little what's called talus at the bottom. And I think that we have here, and there are actually a number of other lines of evidence along the same thinking that I've just given. And Michael Ord has written some very good work on this. So my overall point is this, both in the geology and in the geography, I believe there's irrefutable evidence for a worldwide flood. Because if I was arguing that a worldwide flood took place, what evidence would I be looking for? I would be looking for dead animals and plants. Well, there are billions and trillions of dead animals and plants found in the rock layers. I'd expect to see evidence all over the earth of stratas of rock that are laid down in catastrophic water conditions with no erosion between them. That's what I see. But I would contend there is no historical event that has more evidence than the worldwide flood. Because quite literally, we have 500 million, I think it's 5 million, 500, no, it's 500 million square kilometers of surface of the earth to a depth of about 4 kilometers on average of sedimentary rock that could easily be put down to the worldwide flood. So that's 2,000 cubic kilometers of evidence for a worldwide flood. And when you consider that we have evidence that there is carbon-14 in these rock layers and there's soft tissue in the fossils, I would argue, what more evidence do you want? And we even have records from oral traditions as well as written records from all over the world, independent of each other, that there was such a worldwide flood. And to my mind, there is no more evidence-rich piece of historical event than the worldwide flood. And I think we should stand by that as Christians and argue our case, because what we're talking about here is the authority of the Bible and its ability to, as it were, show us that this is an accurate revelation from God. And that's been the purpose of these talks and the purpose of my booklet. And my next talk will be about the arguments for design as opposed to the arguments for evolution. And I think the arguments there are equally irrefutable. And I feel that Christians should have the ability to stand and say the Bible is, in fact, an accurate revelation from God and should be respected as such. Thank you for listening.